And let's do this now without the mirror. Let's go. Well, we have the keyframes already. We can just go and rip it. There you go. So that was basically a quick introduction to some wonderful basics with animated filters. There is one more that I want to show because we have seen essentially that filters in general can be animated when you pull them down from the filter menu. The main filter menu has a lot of filters that apply over individual frames, and you'll see them also in PD Artist. But many of these filters also have an option to apply themselves to not just the current frame. If you are in PD Howler, you have a whole animated frame sequence available if you set up an animation, and now you can essentially apply the filter all over that. In addition, you have the timeline, where not only can you do very similar things, but you can actually keyframe the parameters for that particular filter so that it can change over time, not only based on what is already image sequence, which itself is changing, but the parameters themselves here can change as well. And then there is one more thing, right? We thought we had seen it all. Well, not quite yet. There is also a new collection of filters you will not see in PD Artist, and it is called, of course, the Animated Collection. So these are filters you only see in PD Howler. Now, even if you're using just a single image, even if you want to do something like render it into a single frame, this might be very useful. So not necessarily because you're going to use it for animation, but because this gives you additional features. There's about 20 different filters here that do some stuff, and some of it might be, important enough for you that even for a single static image world, you might find this enough justification to upgrade from PD Artist to PD Howler. And let's take a look at a few. So before that, of course, I'm going to store the prior animation that I just created because it is so awesome. I need to have a copy. There you go. So that one's safe. Well, not really safe. Yeah, I saved it to hard drive. You can actually go to the folder where that thing is saved, and you can recover them. They are in DWA, Dog Waffle Animation format, which is what you get when you load here. When you go to open, it's going to look for DWA files. But let's go focus on that one more thing, which is this filter that we have here, animated filters. So first one, Starry Night. What is that? Well, it's a filter that will generate some sort of a starry night, and it's great if you want to do some sort of a science fiction flight into the space, the deep space, and have some stars fly away or past you. You can change the size of these. You can preview it actually in the full screen right down here, right? Or you could change the number of stars, basically fly into what's that, M13 in the Hercules constellation, into a star cluster. How do you say? Oh, okay, star cluster. So the size of it can change. You can set the softness. You can add some glow. All sorts of things. The speed at which you dive into this. And then there's more. There's also a little atmosphere down here. That's particularly useful if you're actually if you're not flying into it, but rather flying past it if you want to see perhaps some sort of a meteor shower. And so you change the direction, the vector X or vector Y, and you see these things flying past you. There are a few other options. Novas and flares can be enabled there too. I'm going to go and reduce the stars count, so there's only a few, because this can be a bit taxing on your system, and my poor old system is not going to like this. But let's say I enable novas. Now you see some extra size controls, the gamma, the angle of these stars, relative angle, and then there's another one independent of that called the lens flares. And so that one can take a toll on the speed as well, but that's basically using the options from the flares, right? So you have all sorts of flare options that you can enable, and that can add some more stuff to it. So all right, let's close this one and be done with it. And let's say we don't want the atmosphere. Let's just fly into this star cluster. Full screen preview looks good. Let's go render it. So now it's doing this rendering over the entire image sequence. And again, if you're using PD Howler, you have access to that, but you can then decide if you actually want to use it for just one frame, right? And look at that, it created a bunch of frames for you, so you get to pick the best one for your needs. Or you actually need this animated, and now you're flying into hyperspace. All right, so that's one filter. There's a bunch of filters here under this animated collection. There's a wiggle warp. Before I do this, I'm going to go and store that, of course. Let's not forget, we may want to get back to that. So wiggle warp, filter, transform, no, not transform, animated wiggle warp. That one's great for cartoonish animations. Let's just use the default and see what's happening. It's kind of wiggling and warping and making you motion sick, right? And again, it's not fast enough on my system to keep updating and refreshing as it's doing it. So at some point, it might just give up on the real-time refresh and keep focusing on the actual updating. Once it's done, just give it some time, have a coffee, and come back. And then once it's done, once it's done wiggling, in this case, it will be done, and you'll be able to benefit and see the beauty of it all. All right. So now, once that's done, you might say, I didn't like it. Right? So for instance, here, so yeah, you're getting motion sick or nauseous seeing this. So how do I undo that? Well, if you were lucky enough to use the timeline a little bit earlier, you can still undo what's in memory, right? This were a bunch of frames before that filter was applied. So if you undo, it pulls those back in, and we're back to this one. Right? And of course, if you did the right thing instead, you can click here with the stored copy of the image sequence we had earlier. So a lot of different ways to get back in time. Let's go forward in time now and look at animated other filters. There's a time shift RGB. I'm not quite sure what that does. I haven't used this lately, so let's just do some numbers here and see if that does anything. Not highly visible here in this case. Oh yeah, it does some beautiful color things. Well, it's shifting the colors of the images. I guess you would probably see it better if you, oh yeah, no, there's definitely some stuff happening here. So it might be beautiful. And in fact, a way to triple up on the star cluster, if you then go into something like a grayscale conversion, let's say, where's my grayscale, use a colored lens, something like this, and apply it to the animation. And sure enough, now we have a grayscale and so many more stars before, because we get the shifted blue, red, and green, or red, green, and blue. You can increase the contrast, maybe with the expand to dynamic range. That might help. Although some of these stars are probably already at the brightest, so this being a grayscale, it's not going to change a whole lot. Unless, of course, you do need this a little bit brighter, you can go to the filter and adjust, for instance, with the curves. One of my favorite tools is the curves filter, and you can brighten or increase the contrast on that. So many different ways to adjust this. And again, you have either an OK for the current or RGB, or excuse me, animate across the entire animation sequence. What else do we have in that beautiful collection here? We have animated tunnel. Oh, one of my favorites too. So the tunnel filter works best if you're working with a square aspect ratio. The image right now here is a wide landscape. If you work with an aspect ratio that's more of a square, that's when you will not see sort of artifacts, and it will be the best possible. So I'm going to actually change this to a square aspect ratio. I'm going to resample it and uncheck the box here that constrains it, so that I can actually force it, let's say 512 by 512. I'm going to go down a little bit on the width and up a lot on the height, so as to force it to a 512 by 512 sequence. And it's going to be square aspect ratio. And that's a good starting point for the tunnel filter. All right, almost done. And here we go. So I have an animation that's still the same, but a little bit different. And I'm going to go and map that into the tunnel. So I'm going to go, first of all, I'm going to store this, of course, because I might want to get back to that as well. There it is. All right. So filter, animated tunnel. Beautiful tunnel effect. And we can change the speed. It's basically going to take this image and let you fly into it. Shifting it in X goes forward, and then shifting Y is a rotation, I think. Just use the defaults and you'll see it happening here. It's doing some funky stuff, and in space there is no upside down, there is no left to right. Well, there is left to right, but you could go warp through some sort of a wormhole or do some funky stuff with that. All right, let's see what else we have. So let's go back to this filter, or this image sequence, and see what else we can expect from the animated filter collection. Wave in Breeze. Now that one's kind of interesting because it's more. It's